Hello, and welcome to ISO Buckets. I'm your host, Nate Friesen. Thanks for downloading and listening to the show. If you want to be notified when a new episode drops, make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, feel free to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at ISO Buckets. This week, I'm going to be talking about the NBA draft. I'd like to take you guys through my tentative big board of the draft prospects and take a look at how these guys would fit on certain lottery teams. So with that being said, let's get right into it. We'll start by talking about a guy who I believe should be the consensus number one pick, and that guy is LaMelo Ball. So, for those of you who don't know, LaMelo Ball is a 6'8" point guard from the U.S., but he played a season in the NBL in Australia this last year. So for every prospect, I think I'm going to give my NBA comparison. So for LaMelo Ball, I kind of see him as sort of like a tall Trae Young. I mean, he's not as good a shooter as Trae Young. He's certainly not afraid to shoot a three like Trae Young, but I mean, he only shot 24% from three in his season in the NBL. However, he shot 7 attempts per game, so he certainly doesn't lack confidence from behind the arc. Other than that, I mean, he's just like a crazy long athletic point guard. I mean, 6'8" for a point guard is just crazy. He averaged basically 17.7 rebounds and 17 assists against pros in a legitimately good professional league in Australia at the age of 19, which is really impressive. I mean, I honestly I don't see how any of the other prospects should be in contention for the number one pick. I would entertain the idea of James Wiseman potentially, just because he's so unknown, because he only really played 3 games at Memphis. But I mean, honestly, I kind of see this as possibly another Luka Doncic situation where this guy seems to be a generational talent, but because he's playing overseas or because of other things surrounding him, like LaMelo's dad and brothers and stuff, that he's sort of getting pushed aside, I guess, and people kind of want to play it safe. But I mean, personally, I just think LaMelo Ball is a generational talent, and right now, the team that would get the number one pick would be the Golden State Warriors. And while he may not be the ideal fit, beside Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, I don't think anyone that they're able to get out of this draft would be perfect, just because they won't fit with the timeline of that team. So I think it just honestly makes most sense for the Warriors to take the best draft prospect on the board and trade it, just because they're still in win now mode and they want to make the most out of Steph and Klay's primes. But I mean, other teams that could possibly be in contention for LaMelo would be a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, which, I mean, they just need all the talent they could get. The Minnesota Timberwolves, not sure how LaMelo would fit beside D'Angelo Russell. I mean, LaMelo certainly has the tools to be a great defensive player, but so far he lacks effort and has a lot of defensive lapses on that end. And then, I mean, the Atlanta Hawks could potentially land the number one pick. As I mentioned, he's similar to Trae Young, just taller. So, I mean, that could be a interesting fit for sure. I mean, those two guys would just be launching 23s a game, which would be really entertaining to watch. But, I mean, the Hawks also have Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter and Kevin Huerter. So I don't exactly know how LaMelo would fit in that rotation. But let's move on to the guy who I have second out of the draft prospects this year, and that's Anthony Edwards. Edwards is a 6'5" shooting guard from Georgia. My NBA comparison for him is Donovan Mitchell. I see Edwards as kind of a big, strong, explosive shooting guard. He has all the tools similar to Ball to be a really great defender, but he does sort of lapse on that end of the floor and lacks effort as well. But I don't think that's due to. Um, I think that's just due to like his like because he had to carry such a heavy load on offense for Georgia this season. He just didn't feel like putting out effort on the defensive end of the floor was worth his time. But I think that could certainly change in the NBA. Also, he is also not afraid to shoot the three. He shot nearly 8 threes a game, um, but only made about 29% of them. So, I mean, he has really good shot mechanics, and I think he could definitely increase that percentage when he gets to the league, when he's not forced to shoot off the dribble threes all the time, and he is able to kind of spot up on either the wing or in the corner, and then shoot the three coming off like pick and rolls from time to time. But it just seemed like when he was at Georgia, like he was pulling up from deep because uh, he needed to for that team. So yeah, I mean he averaged 19 points and 5 rebounds, which is really impressive for a freshman, um, and definitely has some of the higher upside of all the prospects in this draft. In terms of teams he could potentially land um, at, he could possibly go to the Warriors. Uh, Again, not sure how that would work. Probably just a trade asset. Could also go to the Cavs. Um, that would be a really interesting fit beside Colin Sexton. I know that Cavs uh, drafted a guard last year as well. Um, but I mean, Anthony Edwards is definitely better, and I mean him and Colin Sexton in the backcourt for the Cavs would be pretty impressive defensive pairing. Um, so yeah, let's move on to the third guy on my board. That is James Wiseman. As I mentioned before, he is a crazy talented big man who only actually played 3 games this season due to some NCAA violations. Um, so yeah, he's a 7'1" center from Memphis. I kind of compared him to Hassan Whiteside. Um, so yeah, he's just like a crazy athletic, crazy good defensive big man. Um, in his 3 games, he averaged 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks a game, which is really impressive. He was the number 1 prospect coming out of high school, coming into this college season, and if he would have played a whole season, it's very likely he could have been the number 1 pick. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to kind of judge a guy that only played 3 games in college. So I think honestly, if the Warriors wanted to actually draft a a young guy and keep him on the roster to pair with Curry and Clay and Draymond, I think James Wiseman would probably be their best bet, just because they lack like really any sort of talent at the 5 spot. Um, I mean, this season they were starting like Marquise Chris, who actually looked pretty good, but like I mean, it's still Marquise Chris. So he could also go to the Cavs or the Timberwolves or the Hawks. Not sure how the Hawks would deal with that, as they've got Collins and Clint Capella. The Timberwolves, they have Karl Anthony Towns, so that makes pretty much no sense for them. And the Cavs, I mean, that would work. I mean, they just traded for Drummond. I don't know if they're going to re-sign him this summer or not, but yeah, I mean, Wiseman would be a pretty good option for the Cavs. Um, so, just because, I mean, we were only able to see like 3 games from Wiseman, let's move on to the fourth player on the board. So the fourth guy that I have on my draft big board is Obi Toppin. So Obi is a 6'9" power forward from Dayton. I compared him to John Collins in the NBA. I mean, he's just like a super bouncy power forward with a pretty good 3-point jumper. He averaged 20 points and 7 rebounds this season at Duke. Shot 39% from the 3-point line, which is good. I mean, he didn't really shoot too many attempts. I think it was like around 2 or 3 a game. But going to the NBA, he could certainly be in a position to shoot more threes, and if he's able to maintain that high percentage at around like high 30s, maybe even 40%, um, I mean, he could be a really good piece for a team. He was also named AP Player of the Year just this week. So, I mean, he had Dayton playing at like an incredibly high level. I mean, I think they were ranked second or third in the country at the end of the season, and it's just really unfortunate that we weren't able to see how he would have performed in the NCAA tournament. I mean, Dayton was definitely in a position to where they could have made a run at the NCAA championship. So, yeah, it kind of sucks especially for a guy like Toppin, who was having such a great season, both individually and for his team. Um, so yeah, I mean, he could potentially land with any of the same top 4 or 5 teams. I think he'd probably fit best with a team like possibly the Timberwolves. I mean, him beside Karl Anthony Towns would certainly not be like a crazy talented defensive front court, but I mean, both guys able to space the floor. Um, I mean, that could be a pretty good pairing. Also, the Cavs, I mean, they just need, like I said, like any talent possible. Wouldn't really fit with the Hawks, just because, I mean, I compared him to John Collins, and they already have John Collins, so no point in having 2 of the same guy on your team. Could also potentially land in Detroit with the Pistons. I think that would actually be pretty cool. Him besides Sekou Demboya and Luke Kennard and whatever else the Pistons are able to get in the next couple of years. That'd be a pretty good young core to start this rebuild for Detroit. Um, but yeah, let's move on to number 5, where I have Cole Anthony, who's a 6'2" point guard from North Carolina. I compared him to kind of like a smaller Jamal Murray. He's like a pretty good explosive guard with like a good jump shot, but kind of an inconsistent scorer and shooter. He averaged 18 points and only 4 assists per game this season, but he shot around 35% from 3 on 6 attempts, which is good. And yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a smaller guard, so he may have um, some troubles on the defensive end of the floor when he gets to the NBA. And like I said, he only averaged 4 assists per game, which, I mean, he wasn't surrounded with like the most talented team at North Carolina this season. And so that could easily change when he gets to the NBA. But as like a small point guard, I think having the ability to pass the ball really well is important, especially if he's going to be like a score first guard. He's definitely got to be like similar to like Damian Lillard. I mean, Lillard is like he's a scoring first guard, but he's still able to get like 6 or 7 assists a game, which really opens up driving lanes and makes bigs like second guess when you're coming at them if they want to go and block your shot or if they need to hold off because you might throw the lob or make like a drop off pass to a big. So yeah, just I think a couple things Cole Anthony could certainly work on coming into the NBA would be his passing and his defense. Like getting stronger would definitely help him on the defensive end. I mean, he's 6'2", like he's not small, but he's pretty skinny and yeah, he's like small compared to like most NBA point guards these days. So some of the teams he could possibly land, I think probably the best fit would probably be like the Knicks or the Pistons. But the Knicks, I mean, a guy like Cole Anthony alongside R.J. Barrett could be pretty good in the future. I mean, Barrett is like a long athletic wing who is a really good defender and is a really good scorer, similar to Cole Anthony, but RJ kind of lacks the 3, whereas Cole Anthony, that's kind of his strength. So I think that those guys could probably complement each other pretty well. And then, yeah, like I said, the Pistons, they kind of need basically just as much talent as they can possibly find. So Cole Anthony, if he is still on the board at number 5, I think he's probably the most talented prospect available for them. The sixth guy I have on my list is Deni Avdija from Israel. He's a 6'8" small forward. I kind of compared him to Gordon Hayward. He's like a long athletic wing. He's super fast, has really good defensive instincts, can shoot the ball really well, can pass it really well, just kind of does it all. So yeah, he was playing professionally in Israel. He averaged 12 points and 6 rebounds, which doesn't seem crazy, but I mean, he's playing against pros, and he's only like 19 years old, so that's pretty impressive. Um, he shot really well from both the field and from three, but the one concern, I guess, about his game is that he only shot 50% from the free throw line, and I mean, he didn't have too many attempts, but still 50% from the free throw line is somewhat concerning in terms of just projecting like overall shooting at the next level. Just because, I mean, when you're at the free throw line, like there's so much pressure, and that pressure is not going to go away. It's only going to get more when you get into the NBA. So that'll be something to watch for Deni as he moves on to the NBA. Couple teams that he might fit with. I think the Hawks could actually be pretty good if they fall back in the lottery somehow. He would fit really well alongside like Cam Reddish and Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter and John Collins and Clint Capella. Another team he would fit with would be the Pistons. I mean, he would work pretty well with Sekou Doumbouya on the wing. And then the Knicks as well. I mean, he would fit pretty well alongside R.J. Barrett. Even the Bulls, I mean, actually, he would fill a really good hole there for the Bulls. I mean, with Zach LaVine, I guess, kind of being like their best player at this point, and Otto Porter is like their best small forward. I think Deni could fill like a pretty good hole there for the Bulls at the small forward position, and kind of like he's a super long athletic defender, so I think he could kind of make up for a lot of the mistakes that Zach LaVine has that on that end of the floor. So I'm gonna say probably the Bulls would be the best fit for Avdija. On to the seventh guy on the board, we have Onyeka Okongwu from USC. He's a 6'9", like power forward center. I kind of compared him to like a Bam Adebayo, which is obviously like a really high end comparison. But he is similar in the sense that he's like a super long athletic defense first big man. He averaged 16 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks per game this season at USC. He actually was LaMelo Ball's teammate in Chino Hills in high school, which is pretty interesting that high school is going to produce two most likely lottery picks in this year's NBA draft. Onyeka he's probably not going to be a very good shooter, but he could certainly be like a really good modern day center, similar to Bam Adebayo, where he's 6'9", just like crazy athlete, and is able to hang with bigger guys just because he's so fast and athletic. And I mean, if he's able to just be like that pick and roll big man, go into the hoop, and if he's able to, I think the one thing he's sort of is not quite on the same level as Bam is like his passing ability. I mean, Bam, if you give him the ball at the elbow, he's able to like take a couple dribbles and either get to the basket or make the right pass. Whereas Okongwu still has to do a little bit of work on that end of the floor. The team I think that would probably fit best with Okongwu would be probably the Hornets. I mean, the Hornets have like a pretty good young backcourt with Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham. So I mean, a guy like Okongwu would be pretty good for like making up for the defensive lapses that those guys often have. and just being like that kind of like pick and roll big man would really open up the perimeter for their small guards. Um, I mean, he'd obviously uh, be good with the Pistons just because uh, they kind of lack everything right now. I mean, the Pistons do have Christian Wood, so I think he would actually, I mean, in like a pretty big lineup, I mean, both Christian Wood and Onyeka Okongwu are kind of like combo 4-5s, so I think they could actually pair pretty nicely, especially because Christian Wood is actually a pretty good shooter. But that would kind of mean like Demboya's got to play small forward, which, I mean, he's probably more of a small forward than a power forward, but yeah, I mean that would be like a pretty big front line for the Pistons that could actually be really interesting. So the eighth guy I have on my big board is Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton is a 6'5" point guard from Iowa State. Kind of compared him to like Alonzo Ball type. He averaged 15 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists this season at Iowa, and he shot 50% from the field, 40% from three, and 80% from the free throw line. I mean, those are just like really solid numbers, especially considering in his freshman season he was only averaging something like 3 points a game. So I mean, considering he was able to increase his production that much, as well as maintaining really efficient shooting numbers, I'm really high on Halliburton. Um, I mean, if he can continue that level of improvement going into the NBA and in his first few years in the NBA, I mean, he could be like a really good player in this league. So I mean, he's just kind of got it all for a point guard. Like he's big, he's 6'5", like I said. He has really great passing vision, a really good jumper. He's a really good defender. He just has like all the tools. I mean, I think kind of like a low end comparison for him would be like a bigger Fred VanVleet. Um, but yeah, I mean, certainly he could be like a Lonzo Ball type. And I mean, as we've seen, Lonzo has like really improved in his like each year in his first 3 years in the NBA. So I think Halliburton could certainly be um, headed on that path. So the ninth guy on my big board is Vernon Carey Jr. I'm really high on Vernon Carey. Um, I mean, he's a 6'10" center from Duke. I kind of compared him to like Domantas Sabonis. I think he's more athletic than Sabonis, but I mean, he averaged 18 points, 9 rebounds, shot 57% from the field, 38% from three on not very many attempts. I think less than one a game, and 67% from the free throw line, which is less than ideal. But I mean, he's like a modern day big man in the sense that he can get the ball like either in the high post at the elbow or in the low post. He'll face up one dribble and he's at the basket and he's dunking on you. I mean, his offensive game is it's similar to another Duke player in Zion Williamson, and I'm not saying he is Zion, but just the way that he just kind of like barrels his way to the rim, and he's just a beast when he faces up, takes 1, 2 dribbles, and he's at the basket. I just think he's tough to stop in that situation. Um, and I mean, the one knock at him, I guess, is that defensively, I mean, he's like a little bit slow in terms of like when he's switching out to guards on the perimeter. Um, but I think when he gets to the NBA, I think he'll be able to just kind of manage in those situations because he is really long. Um, but other than that, I mean, he's a really good uh, individual post defender, really good help side defender, blocked a lot of shots at Duke. Yeah, I mean, honestly, he would fit um, really well with pretty much any team that needs a center. So, like I said, the Hornets, he would work really well there. The Wizards, I mean, unless they want to go with Thomas Bryant from here on out, I think Vernon Carey could certainly be better than Bryant. Um, yeah, so I think honestly probably the Hornets would be the best fit for Vernon Carey in the middle of the lottery there. Uh, Next guy on the list is Daniel Oturu, 6'10", center from Minnesota. Kind of compared him to Pascal Siakam a little bit. So he actually just did declare for the draft this week. Similar to like Halliburton, this guy Oturu had like a crazy improvement from his freshman season. This year he was averaging 20 points, 11 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks. He actually had really good shooting splits too. Shot 56% from the field, 36% from three. Again, not on not very many attempts, and 70% from the free throw line, which is good. For a big man like this, he's just like a crazy athlete and like a modern day center. So I think, honestly, like could be like a more of a center than Pascal Siakam. But I mean they're similar in the sense that like good shooter, really good like in the pick and roll. I think Oturu is not exactly like the ball handler or the passer at this point that Siakam is, but it's definitely something he could work on. So yeah, I mean, I think I've said this for like the last couple guys, but the Hornets, I think the Hornets at this kind of 6, 7, 8, 9 spot in the draft, I think they're gonna have a lot of options to get a super long athletic big man that can work well with their team. Yeah. So the next guy I have is honestly my favorite player in this draft. Jahmi'us Ramsey is a 6'4" shooting guard from Texas Tech. I kind of compared him to Norman Powell, but I think that's somewhat selling him short on the defensive end of the floor. He averaged 15 points and 4 rebounds a game, shot 42% from three. He's just like an absolute crazy freak athlete with really good defensive instincts. He's like literally like a Marcus Smart type player on the defensive end, but he can also shoot the lights out of the ball. As I said, he shot 42% from three. He's just a perfect 3-and-D shooting guard in today's NBA. So yeah, just like he could honestly be like a really good, really good starting shooting guard in the NBA. I don't foresee like him becoming like an all-star or anything, but when you're getting like late lottery, mid first round, I think one of the best role players in the league is like a realistic ceiling for Ramsey. His only flaw really is that he's like a little undersized at 6'4", but he certainly makes up for that with his length and athleticism. He's super strong. So, yeah, kind of like a combination of Norman Powell and Marcus Smart could be a really high-end role player in this league. Some teams that could certainly look to add a guy like Ramsey would be a team like the Pelicans. He would fit perfectly alongside a guy like Lonzo Ball, especially if the Pelicans don't consider Drew Holiday to be a part of their long-term plans. Ramsey and Ball would be an incredibly elite defensive backcourt. The Kings, I know like they have Buddy Hield and Bogdan Bogdanovic, but a guy like Ramsey alongside De'Aaron Fox would be really cool to watch. The Suns as well. A backcourt with Devin Booker and Ramsey. Booker can pretty much handle majority of the ball handling responsibilities, and Ramsey can just basically pick up whoever the other team's best guard is. So I think that would be really good, especially if the Suns don't see Rubio as a long-term backcourt partner for Booker. The Blazers even, if they do end up moving on from C.J. McCollum, which has been rumored for years, to kind of upgrade on the wing, which they could really use. Ramsey would be a perfect fit alongside a guy like Damian Lillard. But honestly, he would fit pretty much on any team, whether he's starting or coming off the bench. I think a lot of teams could use a guy like Ramsey, and yeah, I would not be surprised if we saw him get taken in the top 10 by a team who is not really looking to take a high upside guy, and they're just looking to take kind of like for sure really good role player. So moving on to number 12 on my big board is I have Nico Mannion, who's a 6'3" point guard from Arizona. I kind of compared him to like a smaller Malcolm Brogdon. He averaged only 14 points and 5 assists this season at Arizona. Shot 39% from the field, 32% from three, and 79% from the free throw line, which aren't great shooting numbers, but I mean, considering how much he had to do for that Arizona team, I think he was really good, steady point guard, running the offense. He's a good passer, good scorer, underrated athlete, has really good defensive mechanics, which is kind of why I compared him to a guy like Malcolm Brogdon. Um, he's one thing I think that would definitely help him is getting stronger. I mean, we see with a guy like Brogdon who is like a big, strong point guard. I mean, that really helps him as he's not like the fastest or most athletic guard. Um, but because he's super strong, that helps him in guarding NBA guards. And I think if Nico is able to get a lot stronger like that, he could definitely be like a really good starting point guard in the NBA. A team, I mean, I think also Nico's got like a really high ceiling. I mean, I think what we saw from him at Arizona this year was just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Um, I mean, he was one of the highest ranked players coming out of high school, and I think he could certainly continue to improve as he uh, gets stronger, gets more experience and stuff. A team that he would fit well with would probably be the Bulls would work. I mean, the Bulls would probably have to trade down if they wanted to take. I doubt they'd want to take Nico in the top 10. Um, Another team that could possibly work would be a team like the Spurs. I mean, if the Spurs wanted to play him alongside DeJounte Murray or even bring Nico off the bench, I think that could probably work pretty well. Um, or even like the Wizards would actually be a really good fit. I think Nico Mannion could fit pretty well alongside Bradley Beal, especially if he's able to get a lot stronger and guard the best perimeter player on the other team. Um, yeah, so I think yeah, the Wizards would actually probably be the best spot for him. Um, Next guy at number 13, I have Isaac Okoro, 6'6" small forward from Auburn. I kind of compared him to Royce O'Neal, who's like he's like a long, athletic defense first wing. Um, I guess the one difference between Royce O'Neal and Okoro is that O'Neal is one of the better shooters in the NBA. He's up over 40%, I believe, whereas Okoro is really inconsistent shooter to say the least. I mean, he only shot um, about 29% from behind the arc this season, but he does have really good shooting mechanics. His form does look really good, so I think there's definitely potential for him to become like a really good 3 and D small forward in the NBA. So he only averaged 13 points and 4 rebounds at Auburn, but I mean, I think just the biggest thing is that his defensive potential is just like incredible. Um, yes, similar to a guy like Ramsey, I think Okoro is going to be one of those guys that just won't fail in the NBA just because, I mean, he's going to be like an incredible defender, and um, yeah, I think especially if he's able to get his jumper up even just mid 30s, low 30%, he could definitely be like a really good 3 and D small forward. a team that he'd fit with would honestly be pretty much every team, just because I think he'll be able to come off the bench for any of these teams and provide a spark on the defensive end. I mean, a team that could really use a guy like him, though, would probably be the Suns. Um, I mean, he probably wouldn't start, but I mean, coming off the bench for the Suns, providing that defense that team really does lack, that could be really crucial for them. Or even a team like the Kings coming off the bench, providing really hard defense would be really beneficial for them as well. So moving on to number 14 on the list, I've got R.J. Hampton, who, similar to Lonzo Ball, played in the NBL this season. Hampton's a 6'4" guard from the States, but played in Australia, as I mentioned. I kind of compared him to Terrence Ross. He's like a super smooth, super fast-moving guard, just like able to kind of get to the rim whenever he wants. I mean, he looked really good this season, considering he was playing against professional basketball players in Australia. But he only averaged 9 points and 4 rebounds a game, which honestly, I think that makes like LaMelo Ball's stats just look even that much more impressive. I mean, LaMelo, as I mentioned before, was averaging 17, 7, and 7 against the same players that R.J. Hampton was averaging 9 and 4. So yeah, I think that's just a testament to how good LaMelo's going to be. But yeah, back to Hampton. I mean, he shot only 40% from the field, 30% from three, and 68% from the free throw line, which isn't great. But honestly, I don't think we can really put too much stock into his stats just due to like his kind of limited role and like inconsistent minutes in Australia. But I mean, I think he definitely has a lot of upside. He was one of the highest ranked players coming out of high school, and if he's able to kind of figure it out against bigger, stronger guys, he could certainly end up being a steal late in the lottery. So a team I think he would fit well with. I mean, honestly, I don't see him starting likely. Definitely not in his rookie year. But really, any of the teams in the late lottery, like the Pelicans, the Blazers, the Kings, the Spurs, they could all use a guy like Hampton to kind of come off the bench and just be like kind of like an explosive scoring guard off the bench like Terrence Ross. I think that would be kind of like a really good role for Hampton in the NBA. Would be like a sixth man type guy. Yeah. So the last guy I want to talk about, just to kind of round out the top 15 that I have here, is one guy who I think honestly could potentially have the highest upside of any of the guys in the late lottery, is Jaden McDaniels from Washington. He's a 6'10" power forward. I mean, he's just a super raw athletic wing. I compared him to a guy like Brandon Ingram. I mean, that's obviously a really high ceiling comparison, but I mean, if you watch Jaden McDaniels, I mean, I don't think you can watch him and not see a little bit of Brandon Ingram in his game. Just like the way he handles the ball is just really smooth, maneuvering around the perimeter. He's super athletic, insanely long, and lean. He averaged 13 points and 6 rebounds in his freshman season at Washington, which is actually I think that's actually pretty good, considering how raw of a talent he is. He shot 40% from the field, 33% from three, and 76% from the free throw line, which again is pretty good. I think as he grows and he gets older and better, I think that those percentages will definitely go up. But that's certainly a good starting point. I mean, he's definitely just one of the more high upside guys, and I think any of these teams like that are rebuilding, and that are in a position to where they can take a risk on a guy who is sort of like a boomer bust prospect. I think that they should take it. I mean, a team like the Suns could really take a flyer on a guy like McDaniels. He would fit perfectly with that team. Or I think honestly probably like the best team for him would be the Spurs, just because the Spurs have been, I mean obviously they've been so good for so long, and they're still like a relatively decent team, and if they're able to just kind of compete for a few years, and see if McDaniels is able to blossom into like that Brandon Ingram type player. Um, I mean, if he did, I mean the Spurs would just, I mean they would have a guy that they could build around for the next few years at least. So yeah, I mean, Jaden McDaniels certainly going to be like a sleeper pick down in the late lottery or even later in the first round. So yeah, I think that'll do it for my draft big board. Um, Thinking potentially next week I'll do picks 16 through 30 in the first round, and just kind of look at um, after the lottery who's going to be the next guys that can contribute to actual playoff teams over the next year or so. Um, so if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts about the NBA, you can head over to Fansided and check out my most recent articles where I write about the Raptors for Hoops Habit, and I'm a site expert for Soaring Down South, so I'll be putting out a lot of Raptors and Hawks content in the near future. So be sure to check that out. Once again, thanks for tuning into ISO Buckets. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. I would really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next week.